another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen. Izzo's dying for a moving screen.
It's that dreaded moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn from The Athletic here with Dylan Burkhart of umhoops.com. It has been a minute. Dylan, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's been 48 days since we last did a podcast.
A lot has happened in those 48 days.
I started a list here of all the things that have happened in the 48 days since we last did a podcast.
You want to rattle some off?
Yeah, so college basketball season was announced, so we have a start date for a season.
Mm-hmm.
Juwan Howard had a press conference for the first time since March.
Yes.
There were about 25 reports that Big Ten football was going to come back. Big Ten football was actually announced to come back. I got married. The NBA playoffs happened. Every NBA writer wrote at least one story about Duncan Robinson. I mean, I can keep going. Is there anything that I missed? Like, it's been quite a minute here since we've done a podcast.
I think your lovely bride might be a little offended about the pecking order of the list that you just rattled off, but
she's not listening. It's all right.
Think?
I highly doubt that. She's upstairs. She would only hear it if she was overhearing the intro. She's not pulling up the moving screen on her iTunes feed, I don't think.
We're all very proud of you, Dylan, and very happy for you both. Congratulations. I'm trying to think of the first time I hung out with you guys would have been in Atlantis or Puerto Rico or something like that years ago.
It was in Atlantis, and it was a shit show.
This is true.
That's how I put it. I think you decided to pull an all-nighter because you had an early flight.
But you guys made it from all the way there to all the way here, and happily married and just had a little getaway honeymoon. But I look forward to a proper party at some point
next year.
in non-COVID times.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get after it for sure.
Awesome. So how have you been over there on
Oh, Dylan, I'm terrific. We won't get into any of my situations. Yes, everything is good. I got golf keeping me very occupied. Little U.S. Open action was pretty sweet at Winged Foot. Off to the Masters. This will be a very interesting season, being bookended by the Masters, where it'll be the second week of November, followed basically by the beginning of hoops a week later, and then assuming the Final Four happens in its normally allotted spot, then it'll be going back to the Masters immediately after the season. So that's a good problem to have.
Tough gig.
Yeah, right.
Tough gig.
So, yeah, I'm happy to get back at it, and we have a lot to discuss. We're going to get into some Michigan State. We're not going to bother rattling off all the shit that you need to read on both of our sites because it's been a while since we recorded a pod. Just needless to say, subscribe to Hoops, subscribe to The Athletic, keep this thing going because we can't do it unless people are taking care of our day jobs. So we appreciate all the support. Make sure you are subscribed to this podcast because there looks to be basketball, and we're going to pretty much go back to a week-to-week podcasting schedule here. Right?
Yeah, I think we need to make a pledge that we're going to do a podcast a week.
Okay.
From here on out.
I don't think anyone can really complain too much about our podcast frequency during a pandemic when there's been no news.
Yeah, it's true. But we've let the ball drop a few times. We talked about recording 3 podcasts in one day. A couple weeks ago, we did 0. Like that's been the kind of summer it's been.
That's true. Look, we're all trying to adjust and adapt, and
we can do better.
We can do better, and we will do better. So, all right, here we go. November 25th, looking like a start date for the season. October 15th, looking like the start date for practices. Obviously, I'm sure different schools will run into different situations, and it will look a lot like football, where things are postponed, and some schools will have situations arise that are unfortunate, blah, blah, blah. But for the great majority, this is what it's going to look like. But then what the season actually looks like and the schedule actually looks like, non-conference and conference, still completely up in the air.
Yeah,
can you make sense of any of this?
It's pretty crazy that we're 7 weeks out from the start of the season.
Yeah.
And no one really has a clue who's playing when, where, or how, right? Like there's so many shoes that still have to kind of fall here, right? Like you have to figure out how many games the Big Ten is going to play. Then you have to figure out, well, what do we really want to do with non-conference games based on everything else going on? So there's so many moving pieces, but it seems like someone has to kind of take a stand here and be like, okay, the Big Ten's going to do this. This is the kind of schedule people are going to make. I feel like there's really you have schools that are going out and they're scheduling everyone they can, like Baylor and Gonzaga. Gonzaga is kind of a cop-out because they're not really going to play anyone in the conference season, so they have to. But I feel like there's also this growing trend of teams kind of scheduling their own MTE with maybe a more limited base of teams. They're not going to get challenged like they would in a traditional MTE as far as like 3 games against high majors in 3 days. I think that coaches are naturally a little worried about probably playing a loaded non-conference schedule when you're going to play at least 20 conference games, maybe more, and you can only play 27 games total. I think you look at that and you're like, well, shit, if we're 9-11 in the Big Ten, well, we better get some wins in the non-conference if we want to get an NCAA tournament, right? So a lot going on. There's also the entire health and safety element of what is the right way to kind of go through this early process in the season and make sure the games happen, people are safe, not having a COVID outbreak. So I don't know, what is your read on how all this will play out?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dynamics at play here. And one of the primary ones is from the coaches that I talked to, there generally being a kind of lack of clarity of what is going to be, like what's going to constitute a really good NCAA tournament resume in these circumstances. And they have no clarity on that. And sooner rather than later, something has to come from Indianapolis on, is it just the straightforward same old on what the committee is going to be looking for? Or are there going to be concessions for different situations? Or what is this, what's going to be weighed and valued? And that's a moving target right now, and nobody knows what it is. So everyone is apprehensive to make any big sweeping schedule decisions, whether it's scheduling your own MTEs, where the places that can afford it are more than happy to do it because they're in control of the situation and they know that their guys are in control. They don't, especially if you're a state school, you have people coming to your place. You're not worrying about having to answer to, the powers that be in terms of the actual management of the state system, right? These are things that are going on at every place. So there's that. And, the flip side of the coaches who want to know how to make the NCAA tournament is you have all these other coaches who don't want to get fired. So, they're going to go as light as possible and they want as many wins as possible. So they're going to set up whatever they can to, in an effort of self-preservation, which is always kind of a natural deal in this game. But when you're putting together a schedule on the fly in, these a couple weeks span, a lot of guys are going to, I think, lean harder towards self-preservation versus let's get good games, right?
Yep. Coaches are always trying to count those W's when they make their schedule, even if they're convinced that, like, in a normal circumstance, you need a stronger schedule or whatever. You're still looking at it and you're like, man, how are we going to get to this number of wins? It just seems like that's kind of how the entire industry is wired, so to speak, right? So what we do know is that Michigan is not in the Mohegan Sun field anymore. Juwan Howard didn't really directly confirm that yesterday, but Arizona State's already kind of been announced as the replacement, so I hope it's confirmed enough. So
for the record, Juwan Howard didn't directly say anything yesterday. It was that's 25 minutes of niceties, and pretty much that was it. So go ahead.
Yes, well, I agree, but either way, Michigan's schedule is basically, I'd say, completely up in the air. We know there'll probably – it seems like the Big Ten ACC Challenge is still going to happen.
I believe so.
That's been the report. But other than that, you're pretty much coming up with a brand new schedule for a non-conference schedule that was originally going to be pretty tough as far as that loaded tournament, playing Kentucky and London, going to Oregon. All these things are kind of off the table now. So it's just pretty crazy to think about, all right, well, practice starts next week and they have no idea who they're going to be playing or when or where. So that's, I guess, the big option would be just Michigan try to either get into another MTE in Orlando or something like that, or, like you said, host their own, which really gives you the most control, and it's sort of just like designing your own schedule in a way that's more comfortable.
Yeah, and I would, if I was a betting man and putting wager down today, instincts say I think the latter is more likely. I think Michigan's well positioned to do something like that. It's a matter of if you are allowed to host games on campus, which will be a university decision, right? And it's also the dynamics of putting something like that together, which is, that's a challenge for a staff. There's no blueprint for doing something like that under these circumstances. That takes it's a high level of management in terms of getting these teams and getting this thing put together and all of that. It's a interesting challenge if they go forward with that for a staff that's now entering its second year.
Yeah, and I know at least some schools are kind of running the MTEs on their campuses that are organized by some other group also.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I think the Nebraska one I saw is being put on by another group that will probably
you could have Gazelle Group or something like that.
Any of those,
and put something on, right?
There are plenty of people who will cash a check to run a tournament.
Sure,
they'll do that for 5-year-olds or colleges. They don't care.
Yeah, good point.
So that's an option as well. Michigan State's schedule, they're still currently in the field in the Orlando Classic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Champions Classic, I think, is set for somewhere like early December now. Is that right? I believe.
Yeah.
So those are still on the MSU schedule. But again, you have to figure out the same kind of question is going to be – the same option is going to be there for Michigan State if they want to try to run their own MTE. A lot of Big Ten schools already are. I think Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois all are. So that's an option that is viable. And I think you're seeing big schools do that like Duke, Kentucky as well. So it's not like it's a cop-out really. It's going to be – it seems to be more of a trend among major players.
Well, and here's, make Michigan State's a really good example, I feel like, of, and this is based on a conversation with Tom Izzo this week and him kind of spitballing, the things that are kind of ping-ponging around in his brain is, okay, if you're limited to 5 non-conference games or 6 non-conference games, right? So they're going to play Oakland, right? Then they'll play Duke in the Champions in some way, shape, or form, most likely. And then you have an ACC Big Ten game, right?
That's 3.
And if you have, the Orlando deal, which I'm still unclear on exactly who, but like, isn't that like Tennessee is in that? Is that right?
I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah. But I think it would be set up to be a pretty damn solid field where you're going to have, legit high major games. Okay. So if that's the case, and you have 6 non-conference games, do you want 5 of them to be against top 25 teams? And then you go into a loaded Big Ten and play 20, 22, how many ever games that are just going to be, everyone beating the piss out of each other? Like you're kind of asking a lot at that point. Or are you better, dropping out of Orlando, hosting on campus MTE and, kind of be more in control of the demands on your schedule?
Yeah. And so the scheduling framework is that you can play 27 games if you play in an MTE, and that's whether it's a 2-game or a 3-game multi-team event. Right. And then you can only play 25 if you don't play in a multi-team event. So I think the idea is that people are hosting their own MTE because then they can play. It's basically like a new way to get your bye games in. Right. In a sense, and still get to that 27 game count instead of just scheduling 3 home games and only having 2 other games, right? So you can still get to 27 that way. So that's sort of the math that goes behind why people are doing this, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Wait, do you have any idea of what the right answer is?
So I think it's an interesting debate because I do think that where we're at and how the efforts that will be made by the committee or whatever to kind of evaluate NCAA tournament resumes, I can't see them just punishing a team that plays like 25 high major games, right?
Sure.
If you do that, you're not going to get punished. I just can't see that, even if you have a seemingly mediocre record from a wins and losses standpoint. I think they're going to probably, more than any other year, give huge breaks in the selection process to high major teams in a way that they'll kind of just wink and move along with, right? I mean, I don't really see them giving a huge – like it's going to be really hard. It's going to be almost impossible for low and mid majors to get any quality wins this year in a sense because they're not going to be able to get games, right? So I think there's – like from a fan perspective, I just want to see as many great college basketball games as possible.
Yeah.
So I'm all for like Gonzaga and Iowa playing and all these games that are getting announced. Like that's great. But I also think it can all be a little bit over the top as far as you're really going to set up all these neutral games everywhere and be traveling around during this time. Like, the best chance to get games in safely might be some of these more controlled MTEs, where a school like Michigan or Michigan State can pay for 5 other mid-major teams to get tested, get everything on the up and up, have a controlled environment, and get a solid number of games in, right? Everyone plays 3 games in a long weekend, and then you at least have a season, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had kind of thought earlier on that, you know, these ideas of bubbles were going to kind of take on a much greater and more widespread idea of, you know, 5 teams, or I'm sorry, like 5 game events, right? Where you just knock out all the games, right? Because at the end of the day, above all else, the goal is to get to the NCAA tournament in whatever way, shape, or form it takes to get there, just to hold the tournament, right? And a lot of this is dollars and cents, obviously, but it's fulfilling a massive TV deal that basically sustains the NCAA tournament. You gotta have the NCAA tournament this year, right? So how can you most safely get from A to B? And I kind of thought that was going to be it, right? That it was going to be way more large scale events, you know, tournaments where teams are getting 5-6 games in, and even in conference play, maybe putting, you know, 4 teams in one place and knocking out 3 games at a time that way, as opposed to, like you're saying, right? A game at Iowa, a game at Wisconsin, a game at Illinois. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, and I don't understand why we're still acting like that's a feasible thing, and that there's not a higher degree of, you know, likelihood of something going awry, right? And you losing the season, because that's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
You get to January, shit goes awry, and the season has to get canned again, with every team having played 12 games. Like, that would just be such a disaster, both in terms of the money being spent by these schools to do this, and most importantly, putting players at unnecessary risk.
Yeah, like Gonzaga and Baylor playing in Indianapolis just seems like the most ludicrous decision I've heard of in 2020, and there's been a lot. So I do think the idea of, if everyone can go somewhere for 2 weeks and you can get 6 games in, that would have been an ideal situation. But I also think you can follow the money the other way, where the people that are trying to organize bubbles are just the people who are organizing these MTE tournaments originally, and they just want to get their teams in, get their games in. They're not really going to take the time to pay for teams to get a bunch of other games in, because it's just too hard to figure out. If anyone does figure that out, I think it would be ESPN in Orlando, because there's a lot of infrastructure there already. They have so much control over the TV schedule and everything. It could just make more sense. They have pretty strong conference tie-ins, right? Like, the Mohegan Sun bubble, yes, it's a bubble and they can do it, but they don't really have the same kind of pull, I would say, as ESPN if they really wanted to say, all right, let's get another set of games in. But I don't know. It'll be interesting how it all plays out. I just hope we have games to watch. I don't really care who plays where. If we have college basketball, that'll be a big win, starting the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that everyone needs to just kind of cast aside their version of what college basketball should look like and just realize that, like, whatever needs to happen to just get this season in is the end game, and should just widely pretty much be accepted. And it you know, I hate the expression, but it is what it is. Like, let's just get through 2020, 2021, right? Like, let's just get through this shit, and hopefully starting in 2021, 22, we're getting back to normal, and there's fans, and, you know, we are just talking basketball and without all these schematics and all that stuff, and we're all, you know, vaccinated and healthy, and this thing is, you know, we're on the other side of this. But for, like, the intentions of this year, like, anyone that's like, I want it to be this way, well, sorry. it's really, you know, there's going to have to be some concessions, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to leave it.
Yeah.
All right. So you want to talk a little Michigan?
And some Michigan State, yeah.
Yeah, so we talked to Juwan yesterday for 30 minutes on Zoom. I think it was first time we talked to him on a press conference since right after the season ended back in March. So obviously had a busy offseason with roster moves and everything else. Anything stand out that he talked about to you? I know you said absolutely not. But anything at all catch your ear, or are we just going to chalk it up for nothing?
I think he emphasized the point that a lot of coaches are making right now when you talk to him, and that is that if there's anyone that has any kind of notion or belief that these teams are actually like going full practices right now, that's not the case. He kept emphasizing the word workouts, and that is true, right? Like these teams are having to practice in basically pods right now, where there's only so many guys allowed on the court or in a gym or in the workout facility at a time. So these are all limited numbers. So this is not 5-on-5 run and really getting an idea of what the roster looks like, which is a really interesting scenario for Michigan because of a guy like Mike Smith, right? Where you want to see what he looks like, right? In 5-on-5 situations with his teammates. You need to have an idea of what you have there. And Hunter Dickinson, right? You want to see him playing 5-on-5, running up and down the court for 4-minute stretches of real game type action. That's not exactly what's happening right now, and they'll have to wait a week to get there.
Yep, that'll be next week. You want to see – I think basically you want to see anyone on the roster play 5-on-5 without Xavier Simpson on the court too, right? Even the returning players, it's just such a completely overhauled roster around Franz Wagner and Isaiah Livers that it's really hard to know how those pieces fit together. And you're not going to be able to tell that from skill work or shooting drills or whatever, right? Like you'd be like, man, he can shoot, but you don't know what that looks like in the grand scheme of things, right? In the big picture. So
and we're also, the other thing would be probably Chaundee Brown's transfer waiver.
Yeah. So Chaundee Brown's transfer waiver still not officially submitted. I found it notable today that Kentucky announced that they had submitted Olivier Sarr's waiver today. Obviously, they're in very similar boats as far as leaving the Wake Forest program after Danny Manning or as Danny Manning was being fired. So I do think there's probably some overlap there with those two cases. I'd have a hard time imagining one waiver gets approved and the other doesn't, just based on the circumstances. So a lot of people have seemed to be kind of on edge when every time that someone says that the waiver hasn't been submitted, there's kind of a minor meltdown on my website. So what is your thought on that whole process?
We've gotten into the waiver previously about why it's worthwhile to wait. I don't think it's a coincidence that Kentucky's going first with Olivier Sarr. I did not even see that was formally put out there. Was that via Kentucky announcing that? Was that via a media report? Where did you see that?
I saw a tweet that Kentucky announced they submitted waivers for Sarr and Toppin from where'd he go? Another A-10 school, right? Rhode Island, maybe? I think Rhode Island.
Because I had kind of been a scenario that was kind of playing out in my mind was Kentucky would go first and Cal would come out and do his Cal thing and start kind of putting on the pressure and make it a Steve Forbes issue of, Wake Forest needs to do the right thing here. And, under the circumstances, I think any idea of having anyone forced to sit out right now is pretty stupid. But Cal's got the biggest megaphone in the game. So if he wanted to come out and make this a Steve Forbes needs to do the right thing, Wake Forest needs to do the right thing, put the heat on them, right? And Michigan can just sit there, let all of that play out. Then, the NCAA grants the Kentucky kid a waiver, and then Michigan just mails their result to Indianapolis and gets it back in 12 hours, right?
Yeah, well, we do know that if the other school signs off on a waiver, it's basically like a cut and dry case and you're just good to go, right? So I kind of had in the back of my mind, like maybe they're trying to get some sort of just sign off from Wake Forest to say, yeah, just green light this and let's do it, right?
And for all we know, there's already been a conversation between Cal and Forbes, and the whole thing is just going to be taken care of on that end. And Michigan gets to reap the benefits of that.
And the delay,
and it's worth saying that Cal and Juwan have a very, very long relationship. And Martelli with Cal. Without a doubt, there has been communication among those two sides on how to get this thing done.
Yep. And the other complicating factor with Sarr's waiver was I know there was discussion around an SEC rule, basically that there is another SEC transfer rule that if you are within 1 year of graduation, you basically have to sit out a year as a transfer, separate than the NCAA rule. So I think that could have caused some extra delay. And supposedly I read somewhere that one SEC coach was holding out on actually saying that they should give him a SEC waiver. So who knows what drama that is? Have you taken any guesses on that, Coach?
I would guess that he resides in Auburn, Alabama.
It's the easiest guess you'll make on this podcast. But so there's a lot going on. But again, I think the fact that it's going to be so closely tied to such a high-profile situation with the SAR waiver probably gives a little extra juice to get it done, especially late in the process. But, I mean, you also see, like, Michigan State spent the month before last season politicking for a waiver and couldn't get it. So who knows what goes on, right? So guess we'll wait and see. And, again, it doesn't mean anything about practice. He can still practice with the team, everything else. So it's not like there's a hard stop by the start of the season. Can
you kind of remind people like how he would make Michigan different if he does get that waiver?
Yeah, we actually have a story up on our site today. Max talked to one of his assistant coaches at Wake Forest, and he put it really well, I think, that you have a really good team if Chaundee Brown is your third or fourth best player, right? He does so many different things, but he's not a guy who you're going to run your offense through or create for others, but he can defend multiple spots. He can slash to the rim. He can get on the glass. He's really versatile. I think personally he's probably a better shooter than his numbers say. He shot a lot of mid-range jumpers at Wake Forest, which was just kind of a product of a crappy system. And he was average from three, but I think taking more threes could help him in that regard. So I think he probably fits somewhere along that wing rotation. Obviously a little bit of a kind of duplicates what you get from Franz and Isaiah a bit, but I think having three super versatile kind of wing combo players is not really a bad problem to have. I think it's really, and he really would raise Michigan's floor, right? I mean, because there's not really depth beyond the starters without him, and he would give you he's a 3-year ACC starter, right? Whether he played in a shitty team or not, that's still something that's worth something as a transfer at this stage.
Yeah, and I think he gives you, his ability to kind of match up with different guys is that versatility is huge on the defensive end. And I really like his rebounding for what he could bring to this particular Michigan makeup, because that's not something that really Isaiah Livers excels at. It's not really part of, Franz can get rebounds, but it's because, right. And it's a lot of that is his length and athleticism and stuff like that. But like Chaundee Brown, like he seems like he has he's one of those like nose for rebounding guys where he's going to go in and 4 minutes left in the game when you need a board, he seems like a guy who can go get you a rebound. Don't you really?
And he's probably only like 6'5", but he's a big, strong kid, right? Like he gives you some of that kind of toughness on the wing that you don't necessarily have from Isaiah or Franz, right?
Like, not really out here. I've tried to think of any kind of proxy, like, or any kind of guy that he would remind me of in recent Michigan history, and I can't come up with anything. And in part, it's because he's not really a guy that John Beilein would recruit.
Yeah, the lack of three-point shooting on his profile would probably mean he wouldn't have been a Beilein target on the transfer portal. But at the same time, Charles Matthews was
that's good
guy, right? But Matthews is way more athletic. Chaundee, I think I read a stat that he didn't have a dunk last year. So he's like a good finisher, but he's not some sort of super athlete above the rim. He was recovering from a couple different injuries at different points last year, but it's really just he fits. I think we talked about this kind of this new Juwan Howard mold of player where it's a kind of mid-sized wing who's really tough, physical, can score from 18 feet and in. I don't think it really fits, like you say, a Michigan comparison of late. Because
what about like a smaller? I don't remember if he could shoot threes at all. Like a smaller Brendan Dawson type guy that super strong, physical, kind of hands are at the rim at all times and can give you a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you look at Glenn Robinson, too, of a kind of combo forward guy. But, again, both those guys were way more athletic above the rim type.
Yeah.
I think Chaundee is interesting where he's not that elite athlete. I think he's a good athlete, but usually
Right.
when you have this
backdoor lobs to
you're not going to he's not going to go and dunk on everyone. He's going to do a kind of two-hand finish through traffic at the basket, right? He's more of that guy. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how he fits in. If he's eligible, I'm fascinated to see where they play him. Like, you can make a case to play him as a sixth man. You can make a case to play him at the 2. You can make a case to slide Franz Wagner to the 2. How they work out all those pieces and will be really interesting to watch early in the year.
Yeah, like I would – we talked about – I think when we talked about Michigan State on the last pod, you made a really good point at Michigan State, Matty Sissoko might not be the day one starter, but their ceiling probably includes Matty Sissoko maybe being the primary 5 and maybe even being the starter, but kind of being that guy at that spot. And I could certainly see a similar, very different circumstances, but a similar scenario with Michigan and Chaundee Brown, because he might not be day one starter, right? Where they want to have a more traditional looking lineup to kind of go out there early on. But by season's end, what's the best lineup, the most talent that can get you the farthest? It might be that Eli, Franz, Chaundee, Isaiah Livers, Hunter Dickinson, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of skill. That's a lot of experience. Those are big. There's a lot of men kind of out there in that situation. That might be your best.
He's also a pretty ideal guy to be a sixth man who plays the last 10 minutes of a game. Yep. And if you look at it that way too, like, he could actually be somewhere higher, like not sixth in minutes, but play off the bench because he can play every spot. I don't know. We haven't really seen that from Juwan as much, but he definitely fits that profile. So that's probably about what we have to talk about Michigan. Might bounce over to Michigan State a little bit.
Sure.
I feel like I just want to throw this out at the top. Is Michigan State kind of being undervalued or overvalued in the preseason, would you say, as far as your expectations for this team?
So, first of all, cheap plug. My state of the program on Michigan State is running tomorrow, Friday. So, solid 5,000 word preview on Michigan State. And what was interesting was when I kind of started really considering floor and ceiling for this team, it's like you can get to both in your mind easily. And I think it's really just whichever way you want to lean on it, right? When you look at the ceiling of this team, okay, look at the way Rocket Watts finished last year. And now, consider him becoming a sophomore and taking on a greater responsibility and what that can look like. And a healthy Josh Langford, right, who doesn't need to be Josh Langford of 2018, right, taking 14 shots a game, being a volume guy, but instead being, what Michigan State would want, a more efficient type guy, really good Gary Harris type, like Tom said to me, who's like, best case scenario for a healthy Josh Langford this year is a poor man's Gary Harris. And, I don't see him being that scorer, but, a guy who can make good decisions with the ball, a guy who can hit jump shots, and a guy who can defend, and who's 23 years old as you're starting to. Hey, that doesn't sound too bad, right? You consider Aaron Henry taking a big jump forward because it's not that hard for him. We talked the last time about him getting to 15, 16, 17 points a night. Well, shit, just draw some free throws and he can get there. Make 2 more baskets a game. He can get there. It's plausible is my point. And Joey Hauser, to me, I think is kind of the pivot point of what this team can be, because when it comes to replacing Xavier Tillman, they're completely different players, but in Joey Hauser's way, he can fill a void. It's very different, but he makes them better in a lot of different ways that you consider like, shit, they could be really, really good. But then at the same time, floor-wise, it's pretty easy to get there the other way. and I can run through all those, but I think you know what I mean.
I think it's I think it's way more simple than you put it. I think it's Rocket Watts. I
don't think it's all on Rocket Watts.
He controls so much of the floor and ceiling. If Rocket Watts is a really good point guard, Michigan State has really good pieces all around him. If Rocket Watts is very inefficient and struggles, Michigan State will just be okay, right? In
terms of competing for a Big Ten championship, maybe, and being a possible Final Four team, sure, yeah,
you need Rocket Watts.
You need Rocket Watts to be, an all-conference caliber player.
I could imagine Rocket Watts as a first-team All Big Ten player, or the least efficient Big Ten player who uses at least 20% of his team's possessions. I could literally see any circumstance for that season for Rocket.
So I agree with you to an extent, but I have I might have Michigan State ceiling a little bit higher, even if Rocket isn't, a second team All Big Ten guy. If he's an honorable mention guy, or even, like you said, maybe struggles a little bit as a sophomore. I still think they can be really damn good. And it's because Rocket Watts as point guard is not traditional point guard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to be Rocket Watts and ball screens and the ball in his hands all the time. At the end of the day, big time possessions, late shot clock, and late in games, the primary look that I think you're going to see is going to be Aaron Henry out top with the ball in his hands, playing out of his screen with Joey Hauser, and driving and dragging, or picking and popping and things like that. That I think is going to be as prevalent as Rocket Watts' impact on wins and losses.
That's fair. I just think Rocket Watts has just such a wild range of outcomes that it's fascinating to think about in relation to this team. I think the floor of this team is a lot higher than maybe anything else, just because I think they're going to be really, really good on the perimeter defensively.
Yes.
I guess you might worry about the five and really the whole front court defensively as far as how you get that figured out. But between Henry and Watts on the perimeter, and then add in Langford just with his experience and understanding of how to play Michigan State defense, I think that group is just going to be rock solid defensively to the point where you can get those other things figured out offensively. I'd be more excited about Michigan State as a great team if Rocket Watts becomes a great offensive player. Sure. I think he has more offensive upside than Aaron Henry. Aaron Henry can do all these different things. He's super versatile. But if you're really going to if Michigan State's going to be some kind of explosive offense, I think the guy who's wired to score the ball is going to be a big part of that. So I think what happens with Watts is just fascinating to see. I don't know what to make of it.
I wouldn't disagree with you on that. Just to touch on the defense, one thing that's really probably undersold there is, we talk about them losing Winston until we're blue in the face, right? And what he brought on offense. But on defense, they hit him as much as possible, and he limited some of what they could do. With this lineup, right? Watts, Langford, Henry, well, suddenly you can switch all over the place, right? And you got guys who you're not trying to hide and things like that. And you're going to have a guy in Watts who, in terms of defending the opposing point guard, might be as good as anyone in the league. So, in terms of stopping the point of attack, in terms of being able to switch on screens, they're talking about switching 1 through 5 at times right now. And that's just something that was not even remotely plausible in some scenarios last year and before that. So maybe something that, I don't know, you're making all kinds of faces over there.
I'm just not going to buy. I get that Cassius Winston was not a great defender, but Michigan State had the best defense in the Big Ten last year. They also had the best defensive player in the league last year, who, all right, we'll put it this way,
also solo defended every other team's best player. Okay.
Losing Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman is a devastating blow on offense and defense. However you want to hash that combo together, right? You're losing so much. I can't really buy into, the defense is going to be better because we don't have Cassius. Well, Xavier Tillman.
No, I'm not saying that the defense is going to be better. I'm just saying that the emphasis on the defense and why it will be a quality defense still is what the point that you just made. You have these three guys on the perimeter who are capable of doing a lot of things. Like they can help make up for what's a pretty massive loss in Tillman.
From doing all your research for this piece, do you have any better feel for what to expect at the 5?
So, I mean, the idea of doing it's going to be by committee. Tom Izzo still does not know who's going to start. Just flat out said, the one real negative I'm facing right now is that I have no idea who's going to play the 5. And he said that today is Thursday. He said that on Tuesday. So I don't think anything has changed in the 36 hours since that conversation. But, you have – the thing is that they have two relative knowns in Thomas Kithier and Julius Marble. And then you have the great unknown in Matty Sissoko and how ready he is to play at this level, how ready he is to read a ball screen, just shit like that. And then you have Marcus Bingham, and, he hasn't put on any weight. So he's still 216. And in a perfect world, I think in the back of time, and not even in the back of his mind, probably in the front of his mind, in a perfect world, Marcus Bingham would still finally take a year in redshirt and actually focus on his body and stuff like that. Is that plausible? Probably not. But I think it speaks to the fact that he's still far away from being far away.
I think he's
actually being the center.
I think he'd settle for Marcus Bingham to not take threes when he's on the court. You mentioned switching 1 through 5. Mm-hmm. Would you ever see Joey Hauser play in the 5 and go small? That's intriguing to me based on the wing.
And Hauser has put it out there. He has told the staff that he'd be willing to play the 5 if and when they need it. And I agree with you. Like in terms of that's probably something that maybe develops over the course of the year, like we were talking about earlier, when reaching your ceiling. It could very well become clear that Hauser, and some of it has to be matchup dependent, right? But him as a stretch 5, and then suddenly you're able to get Gabe Brown on the floor or Malik Hall on the floor at the 4. That does make them interesting because like a guy like you can have Gabe Brown out there playing the 3, even slide Aaron Henry down to the 4. Aaron Henry can defend most 4s in the Big Ten, right? In terms of getting talented bodies out there, that might be the ultimate kind of thing. But look at recent history of Michigan State. Like how much, does that really happen? That he doesn't play a true-ish center.
Yeah, it just feels like of the 5s, I'm not sure who you're like excited to play over a guy like Malik Hall, who you probably want to play based on what he did last year, right? Julius Marble, you say he's a known quantity. I think he's more of an unknown and maybe has a little bit of untapped upside there that I'd actually be excited to see what he brings.
Right.
But if you can fit like Gabe Brown or Malik Hall or like you said, Aaron Henry's at his best at the 4, I would say. He just never really gets there because of how Michigan State plays. So it's just intriguing when you have a stretch big in Hauser, what you could do from that position if you went that way. But I have a hard time seeing it when it's not like Joey Hauser is going to answer any of your defensive concerns playing the 5, right? So it would be more of an offensive change of pace probably, if anything.
Yeah, and again, it's the looks, right? Like when they play Iowa, Joey Hauser ain't playing 1 minute at the 5. And there's a few matchups like that in the league.
Yeah, but against someone like Illinois, you could put Joey Hauser at the 5, and it could give Kofi Coburn fits trying to match up with him and guard him, right? So that's the dilemma. It's sit-out transfers are so hard to gauge, right? Because you can go back and look at what he did at Marquette, but it was just so long ago at this point and a completely different system. What do you think the biggest thing that he'll have added this year that might look different than what people would think of him at Marquette? Because I kind of had this opinion of what he was at Marquette, which probably isn't completely fair after basically a year and a half getting better, 2 years almost getting better, right?
I mean, it's in terms of it's going to be 3-point shooting. It's going to be passing from the high post and being able to play two-man game with him in a variety of ways with a variety of bodies.
Do you think when Michigan State took him, how tough do you think they thought he was as a player, and how tough do you think they think he is now? You think he's improved in that regard, kind of as far as?
Yeah, I mean, just going through a year of practice. Like I made this point in the piece that I wrote. Like, you know, in a perfect, it was always thought that in a perfect world, Hauser would have been eligible for last year's team, and that maybe a very good team becomes great. Like, you know, their only spot that you would point to was really 4, right? And if you put Joey Hauser there, shit, that's top 3 team in the country. Considering how last year ended, though, shit, I mean, this is absolute best case scenario that you got a year out of him just practicing, focusing on his body, understanding, you know, the way things are done there, and now stepping in as opposed to kind of being tossed in as a transfer sophomore who, you know, there's a lot of adjustments that going on there, both mentally, physically, on all that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, the value of him getting a year, I think, is pretty high. And the fact that he gets to step into a role that is going to be hugely important. Whereas last year, it was still going to be Cassius and Xavier Tillman, right? Yeah,
it kind of reminds me of what we just said about Chaundee Brown, right? If he's really good to be the 3rd or 4th best player on team, you have a really good team. Mm-hmm. Hauser would have been that 3rd or 4th best player on Michigan State last year. Now he might be, the 2nd, 3rd best player, right? Like, so there's a much bigger expectations too. So I think ideally he would have been that 4th guy, 3rd guy last year, and then been able to step into this role. I think he could have used that experience on the court too. So it'll be interesting, I guess, what you get out of him this year.
Yeah, I mean, like look at 17-18 Michigan, right? When Charles Matthews had to sit out. And he sat out that 17th season. I'm sure they could have used him, right? But that team was still going to be Derek Walton, Zach Irvin, Mo Wagner, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and instead he sat out that year, made his adjustments, and then he came onto a team where it was him, Mo,
a really good example,
and Muhammad Ali, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, he led the team in usage that year.
Yeah, and they went to the fucking Final Four, so it worked out.
Yeah, that's a great example of how it kind of. And then Rocket Watts can be Xavier Simpson, just step into the starting point guard role as a sophomore and straight to the Final Four. Let's just have a Final Four, huh? But all right, I like that. That's any other big Michigan State takes, anything brewing over there? You want to tease anything in your article you got coming?
I'm trying to think of what else is in there. I mean, you know, he being Izzo, extremely high on Josh Langford right now. And we've heard this before, right?
Is he completely healthy? Like fully cleared right now?
He's playing. He's running, jumping, dunking, playing basketball. And has been basically going since July and taking what I've been told was, you know, significant steps forward month over month ever since. So like right now, plan is he is the starting 2. And I think it's going to be, you know, you're not going to play him 32 minutes a game, right? That wouldn't be responsible, especially early on. But he's going to be the guy there. And I think he brings a level of leadership that can't be discounted. I think he gives a sense of age and experience, ownership, things like that are going to be invaluable. But you know, you just hope he can stay healthy. My point being, when I say how high Tom is on Langford right now, it's because at this time last year, all the mutterings around there were that this is not good. Like that the progress just was not happening. And in terms of this year, by everything you're hearing, like it's kind of the opposite. And maybe, you know, this is a guy who, the way I'd put it is deserves a happy ending. And, you know, you just hope that it's actually getting to that point.
Yeah. So it seems like it's trending in that direction, which is probably stock down for Gabe Brown's junior season, I would say, right? I mean, that it's just as you figure out the minutes rotation, that's kind of an overlap, right? They're both going to be guys that don't dribble a lot. And primarily are out there to space the floor. And I can guarantee you, even if Josh Langford had one leg, he's going to play better defense than Gabe Brown.
And you have to bring up the point of how last year ended for Gabe Brown. Like, he was out of the rotation damn near. He was playing 13 minutes a game, scoring 2 or 3 points a night, and that was with a 17-point game at Nebraska. And he was basically a non-factor for not only the last 4 weeks of the year, but more specifically the last 2.5 weeks of the year when Michigan State really came together and was clearly getting to its ceiling. And it was because they went all in on Watts at the 2, and he suddenly was playing 33 minutes a game. Like, wasn't a coincidence, right? So what does that all mean for Gabe Brown? I don't know. I mean, I still think his upside is his upside, but until he goes out and plays good defense and I think forces their hand by making threes and rebounding, he's going to be an easy sit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to be.
What do you think of so Gabe has 2 years left in college basketball. Do you think he's at the right level? Do you think he's at the right place? Like, is this, or is it like, is he a guy that it can happen for? You know what I mean?
I think it's hard to judge. So I've been doing a lot of work with stats that kind of quantify like how much someone plays on the ball, like creating their own shot versus just catch and shoot in the corner or catch and shoot really on the wing, right? Any kind of off the catch play. He's like the most catch dependent player in the Big Ten by a lot. It's like 90+% of his shots were basically created by someone else. A lot of that comes from A, how Michigan State plays, B, Cassius Winston being his point guard. But I don't really think he hasn't shown any sort of ability to create his own shot other than driving off a closeout and trying to dunk on someone along the baseline. He basically shoots from the corner or tries to dunk on someone, right? I think he has the tools to be a better defender than maybe he has been, right? Like physically he has the tools. It's more locking in mentally. But 6'7" guys who can dunk on people and make 40% of their threes are high major players. I think he's at the right level. I just think it's kind of getting him locked in for an entire season, and to a degree that he hasn't really been yet.
One point that Izzo made that I thought is encouraging for Gabe Brown is that he's probably grown up a little bit of late, and is a lot of the kind of stuff that people find charming and kind of fun and all that stuff has been cut out a little bit.
An elite bench dancer.
Yeah, right. And like, that's all well and good if you're the 9th guy on the team, right? And you're kind of a character like that. But like, Gabe Brown's too good to be a character, man. And Gabe Brown is like a dude who you want to see probably lock in and maybe take things a little bit more seriously. And I know that the staff over there has certainly wanted to see that. And that's probably something that needs to happen now. And for him to kind of force his way into a larger role this year.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, Langford coming back into the mix could give him a little bit of fire, right? Like, he's got the guy to follow as far as the right role and the right approach, right? Josh Langford, probably one of the most serious guys around, I'd say, on the team.
But you can also, there's a flip side of that too, where it's also an easy, I'm pissed, right? Mm-hmm. This is fucked up. I waited 2 years. This guy's now back. I'm supposed to be the starter. This isn't what I signed up for. So, like, which way Gabe Brown takes things is in his own hands.
Yeah, bit of a make or break year, probably.
Yeah. And speaking of, that was an actual quote that Izzo used for Marcus Bingham. So there's
make or break year for a lot of guys when you look at who's coming in next year. So
no doubt,
better get to it.
He was your spot. One more thing I'll touch on. He's been very encouraged by Foster Loyer, and I would not say that Tom Izzo has been the trumpeting of Foster Loyer's upside in his first 2 years. I think he's been highly critical of him. He'd probably be the first to admit it. But there's, I think, what they're seeing is a much greater level of comfort and belonging from him and playing maybe a little looser, not just so tightly wound, right? That kind of leads to tight shots, bad passes, bad decisions. So, I'll be curious to see what older Foster Loyer looks like. I think we all thought Loyer, Bingham were prime transfer candidates this offseason. They're both back. What do they make of their junior years? I'll be really curious.
I mean, I think Lawyer's going to have to play a role in this team,
doubt.
right? Like
No
Rocket
doubt.
Watts
Like
is going to
AJ
be the
Hogger.
starting point guard. You're going to have to bench Rocket Watts sometimes because he's learning to play point guard and he's not really a true point guard. Lawyer's kind of a perfect guy in that role.
Here's a comparison. I want your opinion on this. In terms of trying to project out like 2 really good years out of Foster Loyer,
Spike Albrecht.
you nailed it. Yes, exactly. Engage the offense, right?
Hit threes.
Get you into your offense. Play your balls off on every loose ball, right, and all that shit, and make threes.
Yeah, and the Spike Albrecht as a starter just resulted in a pair of busted hips and the inability to walk for a while.
But he won them some games.
Yeah, he left his whole body out there. But I think the thing I would say, though, is Spike Albrecht never had a problem playing tight, right? He was probably one of he just had a kind of a free-flowingness to his game that he found early in his career, right? He played as a freshman, whereas Lawyers kind of had to get over that hurdle. But you also have so many perimeter defenders that now you can more easily hide Lawyer defensively, everything else. So I think if he can just hit threes and run the offense, there's enough talent on that team that I don't think you're worried about him being a rotation piece.
Yeah. No, I mean, the question is he just a rotation piece, right, that's going to steal you 8 minutes a game, or is he going to give you 8 good minutes a game? Those are different things.
Yeah.
What you need to avoid is just a massive drop-off where you're just trying to steal 3-minute windows at a time.
Yeah, when he's out there, he needs to play 9, 8, 10 minutes a game and get up 4 or 5 threes. Like he needs to actually shoot because you have to leverage what he's good at, right?
Exactly.
I think that's the key is building a plan when he's in the game. So you play a little differently in order to it's just a different look, right? And I think Michigan State can probably run a bunch of different looks as far as how they play with different lineup combinations on the court. So I think that probably works out pretty nicely.
Yeah. You got anything else on State?
No, that was a lot of Michigan State things when our outline had literally nothing. So that was impressive. Just got to get you the day after you write 5,000 words about Michigan State all the time.
I was ready to go, man. I was up at 5 a.m. right in the second half of it today. Very fresh. But here, so we're at an hour. Let's make this one episode.
Okay.
And then we'll come back and we're going to go through, right? You and Alex.
Yeah, we can go through the top 25 list.
Did a top 25 list on Big Ten players, and we'll make that a separate episode instead of having a two-hour jumbo pod. Make it a little easier to digest for the folks out there, especially anyone who skipped either school section of the episode. So
let's do that.
That'll do it for this week. We greatly appreciate everyone listening. Please subscribe in the iTunes store, and even more so, please leave us a review if you'd be so kind. That helps us reach new listeners. So thanks for coming around. We will be back soon. We're going to get more consistent with these things. So that'll do it for this week. Be sure to tip those bartenders and servers.